I was going to make this video a couple of months ago when I heard an interview between you and Sam Harris. You put a couple of sentences up together and I took offense to them. It was during a debate that you were having with Sam Harris on religious violence and Islam. I didn't. Shortly after that, you put up two other videos. One was about a politician, an Israeli politician, Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu, and since the first time I heard him speak, I thought to myself, well, not a very nice man. I don't like him, not good for Israel. Unfortunately, he's got charisma and he knows how to speak. The second one was another Israeli politician called Lieberman. In my opinion, Lieberman is a thug, but he's a thug that's controlled by laws and democracy. I could have taken offense. I did actually take offense because you made it seem that everything that they said was the absolute truth and written in stone. And that was it. Okay, I didn't do anything then, because actually I don't like them. A couple of months went by, and here we are in October came along. In October you put up 4 videos. Each one individually, if taken totally out of context, I don't have a problem with each one individually. Except for the last one, where you said the following sentence.
Can we please have the same rules for everybody? Is that too much to ask for?
And now I find myself unable not to make this video. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with that first collection of sentences that I took offense to.
But in all of those cases, it's not the religion alone that determines it. Religion is a factor, and I would say in the case of the Palestinians, a small factor. That in fact, if they had the power, my guess is as human beings, they would react very similar to the Jews and the Israelis, not in the good and the bad. I don't think they'd kill all the Jews, because you have to flip the situation completely, the context completely. On the other hand, would they also subjugate and occupy the Jews? I bet they would, because they're human beings, and that's apparently how human beings react.
Okay, well, I think, again, we're talking about the weighting of various factors, because of course the occupation is a factor, right? Now the occupation is not a factor that explains most of the other instances of suicidal violence and theocratic violence we see in the Muslim world. The occupation of the Palestinian territories has nothing to do with the reasons why a Sunni in Pakistan is going to wake up tomorrow morning and sacrifice his life to kill a Shia wedding party.
Yeah, no, right? Sam, I believe that we are way underestimating, and many people disagree with me, and you're of course free to disagree with me, but I think we are way underestimating the impact of the occupation for the whole Muslim world. That it is driving the Pakistani, Sunnis to become violent. No, but what's interesting and perhaps ironic is that it might be driving the Sunni and the Shia to be more fundamentalist, and in that fundamentalism they then fight each other, which is not the only reason why they fight each other, but it makes that fight worse.
But again, fundamentalism is only a problem if the fundamentals are a problem, right? So fundamentalist Jainism is nobody's problem.
So let's take this bit about religion first. You say it's a factor, a small factor, but it affects the whole Muslim world. And it makes the fight between the Shia and the Sunni worse. Now, if it's a small factor, why does it make the fight between the Shia and the Sunni worse? Okay, then you're going to say, well, no, geopolitical. Geopolitically, Israel is this tiny little segment of the Arab world. So why should that make two different parts of the same religion fight each other, or make that fight between each other worse? I don't get it. Anyway, let's hear what Mohammed Abbas has to say about this. He's the head of the Palestinians.
نحييكم، نحيي المرابطات والمرابطين، نحيي كل ذرة دم أريقت في سبيل القدس، فهي دماء نظيفة، دماء نقية، دماء في سبيل الله إن شاء الله، وكل شهيد سيكون في الجنة، وكل جريح سيكتب له الله الثواب. هذا الأقصى لنا، والقيامة لنا، كلها لنا. لا يحق لهم أن يدنسوها بأقدامهم القذرة، فلن نسمح لهم، وسنعمل كل ما نستطيع من أجل حماية القدس.
Here are the three subjects on the conflict that you found important enough to do segments on in September. The first one, UN report says Gaza will become uninhabitable by 2020. What you don't mention in your story is that in 2005 Israel pulled out all its settlers and the army out of Gaza. And surprise, surprise, looked what happened in 2006. 1,722 rockets fired at Israel, 55 mortars, 371 Israelis wounded, and 2 deaths. Ted Nugent thinks Israel was behind 9/11. Your third one, Netanyahu meme going viral on Facebook. A segment of what some random person wrote on a picture of Bibi and Obama. Apparently you didn't think Abbas's speech calling for blood and death, something that will happen to both sides, was not found interesting, newsworthy, or important enough by you to do a segment on. Here is how an Israeli describes his October. 48 stabbings, 5 car rammings, 5 shootings, 11 Israelis murdered, 132 Israelis injured. How was your October? Here are the 4 segments that you deemed important enough to put out during October. 1. Benjamin Netanyahu gives UN the silent treatment. 2. Israeli cafe thinks key to peace is hummus. An amusing story about a restaurant owner that advertises that he will give 50% discount to integrated tables, Israelis and Muslims. You love the guy, but ultimately you make fun of him. 3. Netanyahu's Holocaust conspiracy theory debunked. The story is that Netanyahu claims the Mufti of Jerusalem gave Hitler the idea of the Holocaust. And as you say, this is not true. Hitler came up with that idea all by himself. The Mufti, in his own memoirs, states, "Our fundamental condition for cooperating with Germany was a free hand to eradicate every last Jew from Palestine and the Arab world. I asked Hitler for an explicit undertaking to allow us to solve the Jewish people in a manner befitting our national and racial aspirations, and according to the scientific methods innovated by Germany in the handling of the Jews. The answer I got was, 'The Jews are yours.' This happened long before the occupation." Out of the 3-minute segment, where you show how wrong and prejudiced Netanyahu is, you spend 7 seconds explaining who the Mufti was.
He seems like a bit of a monster, certainly a bad guy, who did call for exterminations and mass violence against Jews.
Before moving on to your last segment, here are a few other stories from the region that you deemed not important enough to cover. Israel and Jordan, who have custodianship over the Al-Aqsa Mosque, have agreed on steps including a 24-hour video surveillance to try to help end weeks of violence over the mosque compound, guaranteeing that there will be no change to the status quo. The Palestinian reaction: "This is a new trap," Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki said on Voice of Palestine radio, accusing Israel of planning to use such footage to arrest Muslim worshippers it believes are inciting against it. Everything's on video. No incitement, no arrests. Another subject. Palestinians set fire to the Tomb of Joseph in the West Bank, and a Palestinian disguised as a photographer with all the lenses, pouches and vest with press written on it, stabbed an Israeli soldier. Okay, another story that's not mentioned, or no segment was done about it because surely it's not important. Abbas accuses Israel of executing a 13-year-old. Execute our children in cold blood as they did to the child Ahmed Mansara. Now, the story about Abu Mansara is a 13-year-old Palestinian. Him and his cousin decide, well, they're going to go with knives and they're going to stab Israelis. So they go and they stab 2 Israelis. The 13-year-old Palestinian child stabs a 13-year-old Jewish child who is taken off to hospital in critical condition. It's the child that was executed in cold blood. Here he is in an Israeli hospital being looked after. Now, the child is an innocent, this Palestinian child. And why he's an innocent is because of things like this. This is an UNRWA school, a UN school in the territories. So in other words, from age 0, the Palestinian children are taught that, well, Israel shouldn't exist. There should be no Israel. It's from the river to the sea. Palestine will be free. Nice little ditty. You hear it all over the US in the colleges. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Your last segment of October was BuzzFeed journalists attacked by a mob. You start off by telling this whole story of how during a demonstration of about 200 Muslims, a journalist was threatened and attacked. 2 minutes and 16 seconds into the segment, you turn around and you say, oh no, they were not Muslim, but Jews. I don't get it. Probably the reason you did this was to try to dispel the idea that Muslims threaten and beat up journalists, which they do at an alarming percentage. Well, so do the Jews occasionally. So what's your point? In this video, you also say the sentence,
Can we please have the same rules for everyone? Is that too much to ask for?
and because you say it, you really piss me off. I get it. To be a journalist, you have to be against. But you have to be against everything equally, not just one side. I'm sorry, you aren't journalists, you aren't liberal. At most, at best, public relations people. Israel is the only country that has fought 7, 8, whatever wars, won every single one of them. In every single war, the world stops Israel. Has there ever been a peace treaty after any of those wars? No. Why should the Arab world have a peace treaty with Israel? The world's going to stop them. That's why you're dangerous. Vilifying one side slightly, not telling the story of the other side, justifying them. Wonderful. That's not journalism. That's public relations, people. You are dangerous. I am being moderate in my criticism of you because I really believe that you want peace. And I believe the only answer to peace is the hundreds of millions of moderate Muslims that you always talk about. I am going to leave you with this explanation from Dennis Ross on why the Palestinian-Israeli peace process has not yet happened.
He told Rabin in their first meeting in March of 1993, you take risks for peace and my responsibility is to minimize the risks. And when he was assassinated, Clinton felt he had a debt, he had an obligation. And so he was determined to do everything he could to try to produce a peace. So you had an essential ingredient on the American side. You had, I think on the Israeli side, you had a leader, Rabin, who, before he was assassinated, had the personal credibility to succeed, and he was assassinated, so you lost him. That didn't mean that without him you couldn't succeed, but it wasn't easy to create a circumstance where you'd have other leaders who would have the same credibility. Truth be told, Shimon Peres, in the aftermath of the assassination, had a kind of credibility that he, under other circumstances, would not have had, but it was done in by 4 bombs in 9 days. The end of February, the beginning of March of 1996, Hamas and Islamic Jihad carried out 4 bombs in 9 days. At the time, Peres in many ways was unassailable, and Peres was determined to fulfill the legacy of Rabin. But the whole image of the peace process was literally exploded by those 4 bombs in 9 days. The Israeli public went from believing that they had a partner in the Palestinians, and they actually believed it because when Rabin was assassinated, there was a genuine outpouring of grief among Palestinians. What if I do this? Okay. It surprised the Israeli public because their image of the Palestinians was very different prior to that time. And so once they saw, I can handle it, okay. Now, of course, you run the risk I'm going to break into song, so it's once they saw this, they really felt that they had a partner, and that was transforming. But they also believed that peace was going to come. Now, when you had 4 bombs in 9 days, it simply undercut and undermined the very foundation of what was going on. So you ask, why did we fail before? Well, that was one important reason, because then Paris was defeated. And Netanyahu, when he came in 1996, he came in with a premise that says, you know, we're not going to do anything until we see security reestablished. And he established at that time a set of standards that, in a sense, Arafat, in truth, wasn't prepared to meet. Later on, when Barak is elected, Barak is prepared to go to great lengths, but Barak also is focused on the Syrian track, not the Palestinian track. And when you might have done things, I mean, the truth is, we might have succeeded on the Syrian track, and that might have fundamentally colored what would have happened with the Palestinians, and that was certainly Barak's assumption. But when he was ready to move, Assad wasn't, and when Assad was ready to move, he wasn't. And we had a window that closed very quickly, and then Assad died, and he lost it, and then Arafat saw himself being the only game in town. But it wasn't just he saw himself being the only game in town. He was, and I remember seeing him right after the Israelis withdrew unilaterally from Lebanon. And Hezbollah basically opened the prisons, and they said, look, we get everything. Resistance worked, we get everything. Arafat negotiations, they throw him crumbs. The most angry I ever saw Arafat in all my meetings with him, and I had, God knows how many meetings I had with him, the most angry I ever saw him was at that moment, where he felt that, you know, he was being vilified in the Arab world and made to look a fool. I do think the seeds of the Second Intifada were planted then, when he decided, you know what, you know, I'm going to show I can get something too. Now that of course comes a couple months after Camp David, where he doesn't move one iota. As Clinton says in the last day to him, we've spent 15 days here and you haven't moved a millimeter. And part of it was, I think, he was going to demonstrate in a different way that, you know, he could resist also. And the Second Intifada then killed the peace camp in Israel. I mean, think about it. You know, you have Ehud Barak, who at Camp David is prepared to divide Jerusalem. You know, he goes with a proposal that, by the way, doesn't go as far as the Clinton parameters 5 months later, which we present as in response to both sides asking us to present a bridging proposal. And not only is that turned down, as well as the performance of Camp David, but you have violence and then you have bombings. And it completely destroyed the peace camp in Israel. They've not recovered to this day. Because it looks like, okay, when you reach out, what you got in response was violence.